Okay, so welcome back. It's a huge pleasure to be moderating the next session, and let's welcome, you know them very well because they are hosting this workshop on feminist AI, but special welcome to our two Mercator visiting professors, Neda and Kalindi. As you know, they are both professors dealing exactly with the types of issues that are central to this workshop. Both are professors and have highly relevant roles in the departments of women, gender, and sexuality studies in both cases. And Kalindi also has an appointment in ethnicity, race, and migration, and both have been focusing also in various institutional roles on how that connects to AI. And as we all know, they have co-authored a fantastic book, which we had the pleasure of discussing in many rounds here, Surrogate Humanity, and both are, unfortunately, quite right in their diagnosis of what's happening right now. Surrogate Humanity is an unfortunately correct commentary on many things that we also see play out on the global stage. And so the dialectics that you're characterizing is, as I say, unfortunately quite real, but it's not our job to, create a wishful thinking type scenario, but to diagnose what's going on. And now we're looking forward to the next round of how you have been unfolding your thoughts on the topic. And so in my capacity as PI of the project, which hosts you, and director of the Center for Science and Thought, a warm welcome, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and thank you again for inviting Kalindi and myself here to Bonn. And thank you, everybody, for engaging with Surrogate Humanity and all of the exciting directions in your work over the last 2 days. It's been really exciting. And of course, Christiana Leonard, again, for organizing. So I'll begin. On November 20th of 2024, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission released its annual report to Congress. Among its most pressing recommendations was launching what it called a New Manhattan Project for the Development of Artificial Intelligence. Enthusiastically supported by the second Trump administration, the new arms race is about attaining artificial general intelligence capabilities before China does. And unlike existing AI, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is AI that could surpass human intelligence in various realms, including cognition, reasoning, and even creativity. Because most experts agree that it doesn't yet exist, but would be such a powerful tool and weapon, the New Manhattan Project stresses the urgency for US research and development in this field. So the original Manhattan Project, of course, was the name given to the US research program charged with rapidly developing the atomic bomb during the Second World War. At that time, the US government initiated an unprecedented big science collaboration between the military, the academy, and the private sector that eventually resulted in the weapons that wreaked violence of extraordinary scale upon the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. And after the Second World War ended, the arms race continued and ushered in the Cold War, in which the US and Soviet Union developed atomic weapons of greater and greater potential for mutual destruction. Framed in the United States as an ideological conflict between liberal democracy and communist totalitarian rule, the drive to maintain global dominance had lasting and catastrophic ecological and health impacts on communities ranging from the Marshall Islands to indigenous communities in the US, where uranium mining and nuclear waste disposal took place. So the pursuit of artificial general intelligence, AGI, presents two contrasting approaches. One, a sequel to the Manhattan Project, revives the specter of annihilation, complete with escalating geopolitical tensions, advancements in weaponry, and environmental repercussions. Like the atomic bomb itself, which conjured an existential threat, many scientists, including Nobel Prize winner and neural net pioneer Geoffrey Hinton, have warned that when we create digital beings that are more intelligent than ourselves, we have no idea whether we can stay in control. And that's from his Nobel acceptance speech. The other, however, offers a counter-narrative. Some computer scientists, physicists, and theorists have contended that advanced AI broadens our understanding of what life is and opens new possibilities for envisioning future life. In a 2023 essay, astrophysicists Sarah and Mari Walker declared AI is life. Expanding on conceptions of what life is, attempts to apprehend AI and the race for the holy grail of general artificial intelligence smarter than humans supplements the human as a moving target, a key aspect of technological modernity Kalindi and I explored in Surrogate Humanity. The moving target to reach now seems to be life. As I'll suggest, however, extractivist technoscientific ambitions continue to inform questions like what is life and what will life become? Felicity Schaefer and I have argued elsewhere that whereas post-colonial, decolonial, and critical race and feminist scholarship has extensively considered the sliding scale of humanness, who or what has historically been included or excluded from this category of the human, these fields have yet to consider how various conceptions of life differently but relatedly shape relations to land, property, and resources. In some instances, these are also tied to eugenic fantasies of what future life and future humans will be. What then are the stakes of posing AI either as a tool of potential annihilation or as an occasion to expand how we perceive life itself? Are the two positions diametrically opposed? Or if they're entangled in the contemporary workings of technologically augmented racial capitalism, how can they be disrupted? So let's begin with the proposal for the new Manhattan Project for AI, a response to US concerns that China is rapidly advancing and potentially surpassing the US in AGI capabilities. Akin to the original Manhattan Project, proposals for the AI Manhattan Project include government-industry collaboration, large-scale investment that would increase AI infrastructure, such as data centers, and deregulation that would accelerate the development of AGI technologies and testing in various AI applications. Like the USSR before it, China's technological capacity is framed as a threat due to its ideological positioning. The US imperative to attain AGI is thus ostensibly about defending freedom and even democracy itself. And of course, there's a conflation here between freedom, democracy, and free markets that extends from the Cold War era. The 2024 US congressional report, for instance, states, quote, "The Chinese Communist Party continued to pursue a technology-focused strategy to expand internal political surveillance and suppression of dissent and assert China's political and economic agenda in the international arena. The centralized top-down approach is reminiscent of Mao-era authoritarianism," end quote. And the report then contrasts this to, quote, "the market-oriented innovation landscape of the United States." Masking the ways that market logics intensify domination and modes of unfreedom, this is a distinction that I think falsely portrays US capitalism, which is built on the legal principles of racialized and gendered property relations as a democratic and open alternative to Chinese techno-nationalist illiberalism built on a nexus of state surveillance. As I've argued across my published work, including Surrogate Humanity, technological development and design both fuel and are fueled by global relations of power rooted in the legacies of colonial and capitalist exploitation of people and resources. Just as we see with the New Manhattan Project, notions of technological innovation, alongside fears of illiberal others, bolster conceptions of freedom and unfreedom based in racialized and gender systems of knowledge, governance, and economy. As a political ideology, US liberalism connects its universal promises of rights and emancipation to capitalism and free markets, and it deflects the violence it inflicts on bodies and ecologies onto ideological foes, the USSR during the Cold War, now China, and parts of the Middle East. But some of you might ask, as do I, what do we even mean by freedom? And has it today in the US, has it fundamentally changed in Trump's America? So on January 7th of this year, many of you probably heard, Mark Zuckerberg announced that his company was doing away with content moderation and is working with the Trump administration to prioritize more freedom in the form of free speech, but of course many might call hate speech across Meta's platforms. And it's tempting to think about Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and the other tech billionaires pictured here in this slide, propping up Trump as signaling America's own turn to illiberalism and a turn away from the nation's prior liberal commitments. So for example, Data and Society's David Chen argues that contemporary authoritarianism provides new degrees of individual glorification, collective negation, and attacks on the common good, all of which are conducive to profit. Chen identifies a techno-authoritarianism in the Silicon Valley, Washington, D.C. alliance that, to counter the threat of China, grows more and more data centers, increases energy use, and flouts climate regulations as needed for AI development. As he writes, quote, "To chase new and ever more staggering heights of power, Silicon Valley is driving structural changes to the political regime of accumulation." And I agree, but at the same time, if we look back to the annihilative impulse of the first Manhattan Project, we see that the strand of undemocratic or authoritarian tendencies has historically been woven into the social and political fabric of the US state through its foundation of settler colonial violence. So I'll speak a bit about my recent research with Aaron that Aaron spoke about more extensively yesterday. So for instance, we've assessed how the national laboratory infrastructure that emerged from the original Manhattan Project and necessitated large land grabs to launch the nuclear arms race now serves the massive data and computing needs for today's race for artificial general intelligence. The Los Alamos National Lab, the birthplace of the original Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb, not only appropriated indigenous Pueblo land, but for decades after leaked toxic materials into the air, water, and soil. According to Joseph Masco, after 1945, the United States built itself via the bomb, remaking its political, military, and academic institutions around the nuclear revolution. The atomic bomb has always presented a foundational challenge to the democratic order, as it was made in secret, relies on the production of existential enemies, provokes a genocidal imaginary, and locates sole authority to launch nuclear war in a single individual. So Masco argues that the atomic bomb is a form of colonization, which builds nuclear infrastructures and experimental regimes that most directly impact oppressed populations with collective fallout effects. Tracking the genocidal and anti-democratic infrastructures of the Cold War nuclear complex into the present-day empire of AI, we can see these same laboratory complexes converting to serve today's cloud computing needs. So from the 50s onward, Los Alamos National Lab, Livermore, and others obtained computers for processing complex calculations of nuclear explosion. And by the 80s, as nuclear testing was curtailed, national labs invested in supercomputers for virtual modeling. So here you see El Capitan, and they were used to simulate nuclear detonations in high fidelity. And then also, increasingly, private corporations are benefiting from the Cold War era federally seized lands and relying on older nuclear infrastructures for corporate computing needs. So Amazon has partnered with one of these national labs. And as soon as he began his second term, Trump stated, quote, I'd like to see federal lands opened up for data centers. The Department of Energy has since identified 16 federal sites, including Los Alamos, Sandia, Oak Ridge, and others, as prime real estate for new data centers to fuel AI research. US Secretary of Energy Chris Wright explained that national labs like Oak Ridge, established in an earlier era, can fast-track new energy generation to power this AI computing. Meanwhile, such hunger for data centers raises another existential question pertaining to climate catastrophe. Staying with the annihilation theme in this first part, in April 2025, the International Energy Agency released a report finding that data centers made up 1.5% of global energy use in 2024, just a little less than the yearly energy demands of Saudi Arabia. Data centers' electricity consumption has grown 4 times faster than overall consumption in recent years, and the amount of investment in data centers has nearly doubled since 2022, driven largely, obviously, by the massive expansions to account for AI's new capacity. So it may seem that the race to attain artificial general intelligence is draining the life of the planet. So it's important in this context to consider how the slippery object of this new Manhattan Project is being defined, because unlike the atomic bomb, the development of artificial general intelligence is much more of a moving target. Attaining AGI, AI systems that match or exceed human intelligence, are, as one commentator noted, a shifting goalpost because there's no consensus on what constitutes human-level intelligence. Do you pass a test? Do you create art? Do you understand emotions? And so therefore, how do China or the US know what they're racing for? How do they know when they've crossed the finish line? So at stake, in some sense, is who gets to define what constitutes intelligence, which is a question that feminist scholars have long insisted on in examinations of epistemology and power. Traditional artificial intelligence, after all, affirmed hierarchies and identifies those skills associated with white elite males, like playing chess, as the pinnacle of intelligence, rather than other forms of intelligence. And this is something that Kalindi and I wrote about in our conclusion. Generative AI, including tools like ChatGPT, Claude AI, Google Gemini, meanwhile, not only represent the English-speaking world, as we heard about in some of yesterday's papers, through the trove of data that feed them, but they also amplify, reproduce, and norm dominant modes of assessing human-level performance. So Kalindi and I actually wrote an article that came out in fall of 2024 in which we talk about this, and in particular, we talk about how the definition of intelligence used in an early published assessment of ChatGPT called Sparks of Artificial General Intelligence defined intelligence based on a 1994 article by psychologist Linda Gottfredson called Mainstream Science on Intelligence. And Gottfredson's paper, which was published in the Wall Street Journal and co-signed by 52 fellow psychologists, was written in defense of a book called The Bell Curve that argued that white and Asian people have a higher IQ than Black and Latinx populations, and that education and socioeconomic context have little to do with predictions of success. So this is a eugenic logic, right, where nature, not nurture, determine life chances, and again, was the kind of benchmark definition of intelligence used initially. At the same time, the racialized essence of how human intelligence is apprehended in AI is covered over in the way that these metrics are discussed. For instance, Sam Altman has begun to use vibes as a new metric for measuring AI performance. In February of this year, Altman posted the following 2 social media posts regarding GPT 4.5. And so he says, it's the first model that feels like talking to a thoughtful person. I've sat back in my chair and been astonished at getting actually good advice from an AI. It's a different kind of intelligence. There's a magic to it I haven't felt before. And crucially, Altman is using vibes to describe a magical process in which non-life becomes experienced as lifelike. So we move from the annihilation to life, and AI starts to exude the vibes of giving good advice like a thoughtful person. Amid growing concerns about generative AI's potential for annihilation through environmental impact, military consequences, threat to human jobs, capacity to think, etc., AI vibes gesture toward a recent movement across a number of fields toward viewing AI as a form of life. And this is part of my ongoing research with Felicity Amaya Schaefer, and we consider how in this emergent strand of research, computation and information redefine life and posit that intelligent life does not emerge without coevolution with technology. Yet what happens when computation, information, and the ideals of technological progress fully colonize conceptions of intelligence, life, and planetary futures? The technologies that have historically been selected for development, after all, come from colonial and racial capitalist values about futures worth pursuing and developing. Just as Darwinian theories of selection and evolution reflected a racial and colonial framework for theorizing extinction and futurity, it's critical to also consider how today's theories of information and technical coevolution tie theories of life to dominant Silicon Valley values. So computer scientist and longtime Google engineer Ray Kurzweil, well-known transhumanist, believed that if the human species is to survive, we have to merge our bodies with technologies, transform into post-humans or spiritual machines. The proposition comes from his theory of information and the understanding that the evolution of the cosmos comes down to a single process, that of information becoming organized into increasingly complex patterns of intelligence. And these ideas are very much part of venture capital today. We can think about Elon Musk's startup Neuralink that works on brain-computer interfaces, implants, and allows users to control computers and mobile devices. But on a more mundane level, we can consider how human behavior, habits, and preferences that are continuously turned into information and abstracted into capital through platforms from Amazon and Facebook to Google searches and TikTok, harvest mind-blowing troves, right, of user information. And this is another kind of merging of technology and humanity, one that in some ways turns various aspects of human life itself into commodities or non-life for the purposes of capitalist growth. And relatedly, though they would not connect their perspective to the commoditization of human life, information and computation theories of life insist that they're moving past a human-centric paradigm. Google vice presidents Blaise Aguirre y Arcas and James Manica, for instance, argue in a recent piece on the evolution of AI and its implications for our understanding of intelligence that our current paradigms for understanding life are akin to old geocentric models for understanding the universe. They write, quote, "Perhaps the greatest Copernican trauma of the AI era is simply coming to terms with how commonplace general and non-human intelligence may be. But to understand our own intelligence geocentrism, we must begin by reassessing our assumptions about the nature of computing, since it's the foundation of both AI and intelligence in any form." They explained that while it may seem counterintuitive to argue that life is computational, because we think of computers as decidedly not alive and of living things as most decidedly not computers, DNA is code, although the code is hard to reverse engineer and doesn't execute sequentially. Living things necessarily compute, not only to reproduce, but to develop, grow, and heal. So they propose that a computational approach to biology lays the groundwork for artificial life and its emergence. Quote, "Recent experiments from our Google Paradigms of Intelligence team at Google have shown that in a simulated toy universe capable of supporting computation, We can go from nothing but randomness to having minimal life forms emerge spontaneously. There's something magical about watching complex, purposeful, and functional structures emerging out of random noise in our simulation. But there's nothing supernatural, natural, or miraculous about it. Similar phase transitions from non-life to life occurred on Earth billions of years ago, and we can hypothesize similar events taking place on other life-friendly planets or moons, end quote. So the creation of what they refer to as artificial life, this demonstration that self-replicating programs can arise spontaneously from random data, serves for them as a direct analogy for the emergence of biological life on Earth. Little attention is paid to how biology and computation may differ, or the complex interactions between climate, metabolism, reproduction, etc. And there's an erasure of the earthly material resources, labor, and energy needed to generate such artificial life that is now propped up as a model for understanding life in the universe as a whole. And if computation is not just life, but a descriptor of the origins of life, it's no longer connected to the political, social, or historical contexts of its own emergence. Astrobiologist and theoretical physicist Sarah Murray Walker, meanwhile, proposes that life is technology. She argues that technology is not just a tool, but an integral part of life's evolutionary process. Walker asserts that when we move from thinking of life in terms of individuals, a living human, a living plant, a living animal, to instead formulating life as lineages of propagating information, then there's a similarity between cells, dogs, trees, computers, you, and I that all require evolution and selection along a lineage to generate the information necessary to exist. So Walker states that ChatGPT is life. Quote, ChatGPT wouldn't exist without the evolutionary divergence of the human lineage from apes, where humans went on to develop language. Information that produces life is not just genomic information, according to Walker, but instead, evolution produces everything around us, including things not traditionally considered life. Human technology wouldn't exist without humans, so it's therefore part of the same ancient lineage of information that emerged with the origin of life. Technology, like biology, doesn't exist in the absence of evolution, Walker states. Technology is not artificially replacing life, it is life. So to make this argument, she distinguishes life from the state of being alive. And technology too needs a redefinition. She writes, quote, technology in the broadest sense is the application of knowledge, information selected over time that allows things to be possible that are not possible in the absence of that knowledge. In effect, technologies emerge from what has been selected to exist. They are also what selects among possible futures and builds them, end quote. So she grants technology agency over the selection of human and planetary futures. Well, the seeming expansiveness of the category of life is framed as a move away from the provincial insistence on anthropocentric and human-centric approaches to existence. The connection between computation and information theories of life and capitalism's evolution into techno-capitalism have thus far been largely obscured in these conversations, as has the connection between information theories and eugenics, as recently explored by Anita Se-Chan. When presented in a historical vacuum, the information theory of life erases the human selection of technology for militarism. We can go back to think about the Manhattan Project for AI, the exploitation of natural resources, and the propagation of capitalist relations and labor exploitation necessary to train AI. These selected technologies and how humans choose to use them have helped make faster, more efficient, and profitable the extinguishing of colonized lives and knowledges and have facilitated extractive planetary relations. Additionally, theories of life that uncritically conflate technological innovation with the notion of evolution as progress exclude many people on Earth from the category of intelligent or evolved life. Writing in a different context about how the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, uses the principle of the Great Filter to speculate that life elsewhere developed advanced technologies in the same way it did in Europe and the colonies, William Lempert observes that there may in fact be numerous extraterrestrial intelligences throughout the universe that can't be found because of their sustained avoidance of the self-destructive expansionist behavior that some SETI researchers celebrate. Furthermore, it's worth considering who the Great Filter excludes, namely every non-expansionist human society, past and present, and everyone that has not produced radio telescopes or attempted space travel. This includes every indigenous society, not to mention nearly all others. By this logic, Aboriginal Australians who have lived relatively sustainably for at least 80,000 years have failed to pass through the Great Filter. Meanwhile, Western societies that threaten to render Earth uninhabitable in the near future are positioned at the precipice of transcendence, end quote. So that was Lempert. So by way of conclusion, we can consider artificial general intelligence, AGI, as a provocation for positing a critical juncture between the specter of annihilation and an understanding of life as computation and technological selection. While the New Manhattan Project for AI evokes the destructive potential and geopolitical escalations of its atomic predecessor, a parallel narrative emerges from information theories of life, which posit AI as an apolitical evolution of existence itself. However, as I've suggested, both perspectives are still entangled in the reproduction of capitalist and colonial relations as the status quo. The drive for AGI, whether framed as a race for global supremacy or a redefinition of life, obscures the historical and ongoing modes of exploitation of labor and resources, the perpetuation of racialized and gendered hierarchies of intelligence, and the immense environmental cost. By understanding how the ideology of technological progress and the push for AGI have repackaged human and resource exploitation as human evolution and even life itself, we can perhaps start to conceive of different modalities of life and living. So I'll end there. Thank you.